Top scorers also don't just want to get that question right, but they want total control over the exam. That's what separates the good from the elite. A 165 scorer just wants to get through the section and get most of the questions right. But a 175 scorer wants to predict the trap before they even read the choices. They want to articulate why every wrong answer is wrong, and they want to recognize the flaws instantly, even when they're disguised. It's not about luck anymore for them, it's about mastery. Now, if you train like a 175 scorer, you're thinking deeper, you're reviewing harder, and you're studying the test makers, not the test, you can get there. I've seen it happen over and over again. You don't have to have a 4.0 GPA, have a major in philosophy, or be naturally good at logic. You've just got to stop studying like a test taker and start training like an athlete. And when you make that shift, your confidence skyrockets, your anxiety fades, your score stabilizes, your prep time becomes more efficient, and you become the kind of person who scores a 175 plus. And getting that score doesn't just change your admissions outcomes, it changes your entire life trajectory. We're talking full tuition scholarships, T14 law school acceptances, and the freedom to choose where you go, not based just on what you can afford. And it gives you a level of confidence that you carry into law school and beyond. The day that you stop treating the LSAT like just another test and you start treating it like a total mental transformation, that's the day everything starts to click. Most powerful but overlooked tools for breaking out of the 160s, the Micro Audit. Now, when most students hear audit, they think, oh, I already review my wrong answers after every section. And that's great, but it's the bare minimum. That is table stakes. If you're aiming for a 175, we've got to go deeper. A micro audit means tracking not just what you got wrong, but how your brain behaved during the test. Think back to the last section you did. There were probably a couple of questions where you didn't feel confident. Maybe you paused for a second, reread a line, stared at two choices going back and forth, and that pause, that moment of hesitation, that right there is the problem. Because on that LSAT, hesitation equals doubt. Doubt slows you down, and slow costs you time. And time pressure forces bad decisions at the end of the section where the hardest questions usually show up. So even if you got that one question right, that tiny hesitation might have cost you 3 other questions later. So here is what the micro audit does. After every section, you go back and ask yourself one question. Where did I hesitate? You're not just circling wrong answers anymore. You're circling any moment where your brain hesitated even for a second. It could be a question you flagged, a moment where you said, wait, what is this even asking? An argument where you had to reread the conclusion twice, or a toss-up between 2 different choices that drained 90 seconds. Every one of those moments is a data point. Those are the real problems, not just the ones that show up as wrong answers. Now here's where it gets good. Once you start logging these hesitations consistently, you'll notice patterns. It might be certain question types that always slow you down, certain keywords that trigger second guessing, certain argument structures that make you freeze. These patterns are gold because they tell you exactly what to drill next, not based on what some course tells you, but based on your brain's behavior under pressure. You might realize, wow, I hesitate every time there's a causal argument with a surprising conclusion. Boom, that right there is your next focused drill. Or, every time I rush, it's because I lost 10 seconds rereading the stimulus up top. Now we train to clarity on the first read. I had one student who realized that even on questions he got right, he was burning 30 seconds flipping between 2 choices. That hesitation never showed up in his missed question review, but it showed up in his timing, and it was quietly costing him points at the end of every section. Once we audited that, the fix was simple. He built a rule for himself. Trust your first instinct unless you see a specific reason to doubt it. He drilled that rule with timers, reps, and review. Within 2 weeks, his raw scores jumped by 4 points per section without learning anything new. So how do you actually run a micro audit? Here is a basic process you can follow right now. First, during the section, mark any question where you paused more than 10 seconds, reread the stimulus or question stem, got stuck between two choices, and you flagged it or skipped it. Then, after the section, go through those questions first, even if you got them right. For each one, ask what slowed me down, what confused me, and what rule or habit would have prevented that hesitation. Then you log it, just a Google Sheet or a notebook with 3 columns, what happened, why it happened, and what I'll do differently next time around. That's it. It's simple, it's boring, but it is incredibly effective. If you do this consistently, section after section, you'll get to a point where you can predict before the section starts which types of questions will try to trip you up. And more importantly, you'll already have a plan for how to handle them. That's when the LSAT starts to feel boring, predictable, and under control, and that's when the big jumps happen from 162 to 170, 172, 175, and beyond. Not by learning more, but by thinking better, by removing friction, by getting clear on how you solve, not just what you solve. That is the micro audit, and it's one of the best kept secrets of top scorers. Quietly wreck your progress, and almost nobody catches it in time. You keep making the same mistakes, not once, not twice, but over and over, sometimes on the exact same question type. And the worst part is you don't even realize it. Why? Because every time you review a question and see the explanation, you go, oh yeah, I kinda see why that's wrong. That kinda is poison. It tricks your brain into thinking the problem is solved. But guess what? If you can't explain the reasoning in your own words out loud with no notes, if you can't spot the exact moment when your thinking went sideways, you're going to make the same mistake next time and the time after that. So how do we fix this? We use a 2-part system. Part 1, pattern drills. Part 2, the weekly data autopsy. Let's break down each one. Part 1, pattern drills. Most students review the LSAT like they're grazing at a buffet. A little flaw question here, a little strengthening question there, one reading passage, then maybe a full section for variety. But that scattered approach never builds mastery. You don't need more variety, you need more reps. If you missed 3 necessary assumption questions in a single section, that's not a coincidence, that is a pattern. You want to build targeted pressure around that one weakness. First, you want to ID the exact moment your process broke down. Not, I got it wrong, but I narrowed it down to 2 answers and chose the extreme one instead of the one that had to be true. Then you find 5 or 10 questions similar to that one that test the same skill. Then you drill them back to back. Same error type, same structure. You're not just solving questions here, you're solving your brain's default mistake under that condition. Then after each one, you explain your reasoning out loud. You want to hear yourself get faster, clearer, and more confident with each rep. This process rewires your instincts. It's not sexy, it doesn't feel productive the same way doing full sections does, but this is where the real gains happen. Now let's talk about part 2, the weekly data autopsy. Once a week, just once, you pause everything and analyze your patterns. Not your overall score, not your timing splits, but I'm talking about what are the 3 specific thinking errors that cost you the most points this week. Here is the 3-question framework I give my students. First, what were the top 3 recurring mistakes? Not just question types, but thinking habits. For example, I misread the conclusion. I assumed correlation meant causation, or I eliminated the right answer too fast. Then we ask, what caused each one? And we go deeper. Was it fatigue, rushing, overconfidence, or an unclear process? Then we ask, what is the one fix I can try for each mistake next week? Maybe it's pausing after reading the conclusion and forcing myself to restate it before moving on. Maybe it's circling extreme words and choices to slow down elimination. Or maybe it's flagging any question where I feel myself guessing too early. You're not trying to be perfect here, you're trying to improve in one small area at a time. Try it, track it, move on, and repeat the cycle next week. When you drill this way, your prep becomes strategic. You stop jumping around, You stop overcorrecting for one mistake while ignoring 5 others, and you stop mistaking activity for progress. Instead, you start thinking like an analyst. You ID the leak, you isolate the cause, you patch it, and you move on. Over time, your list of recurring mistakes will get smaller and smaller, and your score will start to climb. That's not magic, it's feedback plus action plus consistency. Now, I had one student, let's call her Tara, who was stuck at a 164. She was super smart, super diligent, but she kept getting 3 logical reasoning questions wrong in each section. We ran a data autopsy and found her biggest issue wasn't understanding the argument, it was rushing to eliminate the right answer because it felt off. So for 1 week, she drilled just that. She reread every answer she was about to eliminate. She asked, what exactly is wrong with this? And she forced herself to articulate the flaw before crossing it out. In 10 days, her raw score in LR jumped by 5 points. Again, no new content, just fixing a tiny, consistent leak. And of course, disclaimer, your results may vary. Every student individual is unique, but I share this story to point out for you what is possible when you run a data autopsy like this and look at your process rather than just what feels good in the moment. And this kind of process is what separates high scorers from everyone else. They don't just review, but they study how they work, they study their thought processes and how they implement them under timed conditions. They get obsessed with tiny patterns. They act like surgeons, not just students. And if you're serious about scoring 175 and above, that is the shift you want to make. Not just solving more questions, but solving the right questions in the right way based on the real data of your own performance. And that starts with pattern drills and the data autopsy every week, no exception. Another mistake I see students making that I made myself is to use explanations obsessively, to become dependent upon them as a crutch. After every single question, I was checking the answer key, then checking the explanation if I got it wrong. You don't want to do this for a couple of reasons. One is that you want to make sure that you develop some self-control to refrain from looking at the answer key until you've completed the entire exam. Definitely don't stop in the middle of a section, let alone in between sections. You want to wait till the exam is complete, and you don't want to get into the habit of getting the immediate instant feedback because you're not going to be able to do that on testing. You got to make it through the exam regardless. You also don't want to become dependent on someone else's thought process because it's ultimately going to be you walking in there on test day, and you've got to develop your own understanding of the questions and the mistakes in your reasoning so that you can make the course corrections for yourself. And that's why, as part of the Socratic review method framework, I actually have you write out your thought process, and together we analyze what you wrote and why. So we're looking at what was your initial mistaken reasoning and what is your new and improved corrected reasoning upon reflection post-analysis. I personally learned a ton when I wrote my own explanations for over 1,000 LSAT prep test questions. Literally over 1,000 questions. I wrote them for prep tests 46 through 65, every single argument, every single answer choice, all 5 choices, and I learned a ton in the process. I saw that there are patterns in how LSAT designs these questions, but I could not have absorbed all of that analysis, all of those deep insights, had I just been copying someone else's framework, someone else's thought process. I had to do this for myself, and that's why I encourage you to do it for yourself as well. First is Jess. She was plateauing for 7 months and eventually ended up with a 177. She came to me after 7 months of plateau, and she'd done everything you're supposed to do. She read the Bibles, took 2 different online courses. She used every free resource that she could find. And her scores were hovering between 162 and 167 no matter how much she studied. When we first spoke, she said, "I'm doing everything right, but I don't know what else to try at this point." So here's what we did. We didn't change how much she studied, we changed how she studied. She was reviewing questions by asking herself, why is A right? And then moving on. So we flipped it. Instead, we had her ask, what was tempting about my wrong choice? What flaw in the reasoning did I miss? And what misread or assumption led me to eliminate the right answer? We built her a flaw tracker, not some generic checklist. She created her own custom categories in her language. For example, this question punishes overconfidence in correlation equaling causation. Or, this choice baits me with emotionally appealing language. Suddenly, she wasn't reacting to the LSAT anymore, she was reading its mind. In 6 weeks, she went from a frustrated 165 to a calm, locked-in 177. Another example is Kevin. His diagnostic was a 160, but he was aiming for 170. He was a smart guy, had a strong work ethic, but after months of studying, he plateaued at a 164 to 166 range. His biggest issue was reading comprehension. He hated it, avoided it, he said it felt random, so he stripped it down. Most students make the mistake of reading passages like they're in school. They're highlighting keywords, they're getting the gist of it, hoping they remember the details. But that's useless at the level of the LSAT. So we rebuilt Kevin's approach from the ground up. We had him label every paragraph with main point, support, counterpoint, or rebuttal, and he treated each passage like it was a legal document. He dissected the structure, tracked the argument, and ignored all the fluff. Instead of asking, "What did I just read?" he asked, "What job does this paragraph do for the overall argument?" He stopped skimming and started diagnosing. And most importantly, he didn't just improve, he felt in control. His final score was a 173, and he went from hating reading comp to getting all 4 passages done with 3 to 4 minutes to spare. Now, another story is from David. David was your classic high achiever, went to an Ivy League for undergrad, had a 3.8 GPA, but when it came to the LSAT, he was stuck at a 161. He said, "I feel like I'm not just cut out for this kind of logic." And that wasn't true. The problem was that he was treating every question like a special snowflake, starting from scratch every single time. So we gave David structure and built him a question type tracker. Every logical reasoning miss was logged. And he categorized his errors not just by type, but by trap pattern. For each miss, he wrote a short "what I learned" note, and we gave him flashcards not for content, but for intuition building. And his practice test scores started rising steadily. He stopped second-guessing himself, and he walked into test day calm. His final score was a 174, and he got into a T14 law school with a scholarship. Not because he worked harder, but because he learned how the test thinks. Now here's what all these students have in common, and again, disclaimer, your results may vary. These results are not typical. There are no guarantees. These students were not prodigies. They weren't born logical thinkers. They weren't cramming 8 hours a day. They just stopped doing what everyone else was doing, and they started training like high performers. They reviewed their thinking, not just their answers. They built custom systems that tracked error patterns. They learned to anticipate traps instead of falling for them. Now let's go back to my student Kevin from earlier. He was stuck at a 165 for 5 weeks. He thought it was a reading speed issue and kept trying to go faster with more passages, more practice tests, but he was still stuck. Now here's what actually worked for him. He started labeling every paragraph in reading comp like a legal outline. He stopped highlighting, stopped summarizing, and started reading only for structure. He tracked how each paragraph advanced or attacked the thesis of the argument and wrote down his reading comp mindset before and after each passage. Within 2 weeks, he started seeing the questions differently. He didn't feel faster, but his accuracy jumped. Final score, 173. That's what breaks a plateau. Not hope, not more hours, but upgraded thinking combined with structured feedback and identity level focus. Now, the pain of the plateau is real, but the plateau itself is fake. It's the LSAT telling you that you've gotten as far as you can with your current habits. If you want to go further, you've got to start thinking like a 175 scorer. It's not about grinding harder, it's about leveling up your mental game on purpose. Now let's talk about the one thing that changes everything. It's not your reading comp strategy, it's not your logical reasoning drills, I'm talking about your identity. Because the students who score 175 and above, they were already thinking like 175 scores before they saw it on their score report. They don't say, "I hope I can improve." They say, "I'm training to think like the person this test was written for." That's the mindset. They don't wish for confidence, they build it by attacking their weak points, drilling with intention, and refusing to let a single mistake slide without learning from it. They don't need motivation hacks. They're obsessed with leaving nothing on the table. They don't trust raw talent. They don't rely on feeling good during a section. They trust their mistake journal, their pattern tracker, their review systems, their tested reading comp structure breakdown approach, and their repeated exposure to the same logic traps until they're immune. They're showing up like athletes, not like they're just good test takers, but they are operators. They don't look at a tough question and spiral. They pause and they ask themselves, What is the LSAT trying to make me believe here, and why? They stay calm when things go sideways. They've trained for that. The mental loop most people fall into, second guessing, rushing, panicking, doesn't happen for them anymore because they've practiced recovering from it hundreds of times. This is the same test you're taking, but they just trained differently. Now, most students walk into the LSAT hoping to avoid disaster, but elite scorers walk in ready to dominate. They've run every drill, they've tracked every error pattern, and they've tested every timing variation. Their brain isn't guessing, it's executing. They don't just hope they're going to recognize the flaw, they know what kind of traps show up in logical reasoning. They've seen this before, they're prepared for it. Confidence comes from proof of work. Most students define success as, I hope I get a good score. But elite scorers define success as, I want to train so well that even on my worst day, I'm beating most people's best day. They're not trying to avoid making stupid mistakes, they're building their lowest performance to still be a 170 and above. They're not chasing perfection, they're building consistency. They know that true mastery is boring, putting in the reps, reviewing, writing down the same mental error 5 times till it sticks. And they love that. Boring is good because they know what's on the other side. Full ride scholarships, options instead of desperation, a law school experience free from financial pressure, and a career path they chose, not one they're just settling for. If you want a 175 and above, stop acting like a student and start acting like an operator. A student asks, how many hours should I study per day, per week, what have you? An operator asks, what system am I using to engineer my score increase and where is the bottleneck? A student asks, what should I do next? An operator asks, what is the highest leverage next move to eliminate this pattern in mistakes once and for all? That's the level we're playing at now. You don't get to the top 1% by doing what everyone else does. You get there by thinking in systems, executing with intention, and reviewing with brutal honesty. And the moment you make that shift from trying to get a high score to becoming the kind of person who earns one, everything changes. So if you're still asking, what should I do next? That tells me one thing. You're still thinking like a student. Instead, I want you to start thinking like a 175 plus scorer. You want to build the systems, track the patterns, and start studying your own brain. And when you finally stop trying to get better and start becoming unrecognizable to who you were 30 points ago, that's when the score jumps. That's it right